What's up, everybody? Andrew Cooper here. Whoops, what's happening? Andrew Cooper here, Fantasy Alarm. And today we are getting into the rookie profiles, man. We've got some articles up on the website. Dan Servadidio, who is plugged into college football all year long. So he comes in, helps us out with that, with quarterback, wide receiver, running back. And then I do the tight ends, of course. As always, I break down the tight end prospects. That article is going up today. And you can see what we look for, what we don't. One thing I want to make clear in this particular show going into the draft is that right now we're just kind of grouping guys together, right? There's a lot of people out there that really do love the draft. They love prognosticating, right? They're Devy guys. They love to rank. They love to do mock drafts, and that's great. That's fun. If you play Devy and you draft before the NFL draft, you need that, right? You need somebody to tell you who's going to go where and whether it's going to matter. For us, we play Dynasty, right? And our drafts are after the NFL draft, right? And when you look across this industry, not just the way I operate and the way Howard Bender operates, but at the way guys like Dwayne McFarland operate, the way JJ Zacharyson operates, the number one part of their formula, part of their model, the top one is draft capital. Draft capital has historically been the number one uh, most indicative metric for fantasy success. I mean, we can't ignore that, especially at the quarterback position, where when you look at the quarterback one, quarterback two, quarterback three, and you look at the first round versus second round versus third round, all the way down, it has been the number one most indicative metric. So, and I know it's people don't like to hear that. It's boring to say that. Have a take, blah, blah. That's what people say. We do have takes. What we're going to do today is we're going to take the players and kind of group them into categories, group them into tiers, and tell you what we need to see from the draft narrative, who goes where, what landing spots they have, what order they get picked, who gets traded up for, who goes day three. And we're going to tell you, what we like about these guys. And if the draft confirms that, then you got the green light to go ahead. And we're going to tell you about some cons for these guys and what we don't like. And if they fall in the draft, like guys like Hakeem Butler did in the past, highly touted prospects that fell in the draft and didn't pan out, then you can look at it and say, wow, it looks like the red flags here outweighed some of the positives. And of course, there are some hits from the later rounds. But when you look at those picks, a lot of the cases, it's because they fell for off-field reasons or other reasons, right? You look at there's of course a couple guys like Puka Nakua, right, that kind of fell. Amon-Ra St. Brown fell, but a lot of that is due, potentially to his brother being a bust and his dad being kind of crazy. Uh, you know, there's very few guys that just hit on in those regards, right? Guys like Antonio Brown, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs fell for character issues. Pierre Garcon was a Division three guy that went to Mount Union, right? Julian Edelman was a quarterback. When you start with, Brandon Marshall had bipolar disorder. When you look at the guys that hit from the later rounds, once you start pulling out the guys that didn't fall due to talent or fell due to off-field issues, the hit rates aren't great. So what we're going to do here is go through quarterback, wide receiver, running back, tight end. We're going to look at the top prospects in this one. So like quarterback, top 5, 6 or so. We'll look at the top 12 wide receivers. We'll look at the group of running backs because it is pretty flat this year that we think can be pretty good. And we'll look at a bunch of tight ends. And then maybe next week what we'll do is we'll go and look at the deep cuts, like the deeper guys when we say, okay, you know what? There's some things to like about this guy. If he moves up in the draft, then we'll be excited. If he's a surprise pick, then we're going to move him way up. So why don't we get into it right now and start with the quarterbacks. What's up, everybody, for popping in? Thanks for hanging out in the chat. Bindles, we see you hanging out, man. Good afternoon, everybody. And let's get excited because the draft is right around the corner, man. Fantasy football never stops for me. We're always doing FFPC, best ball drafts. We're doing FFPC dynasty drafts. We're taking over orphan teams. They're our sponsor for the show today. If you want to get set up with them, myffpc.com. Use promo code Coop. They'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more. We'll get into a little bit of that later. But first, let's look at the quarterbacks, right? So for me, I group these guys into tiers, and then the draft capital will either confirm that or move it around. Number one for me with a bullet is Caleb Williams. I think he does go to the Bears. And if the Bears draft him at 1 and confirm that, he should be the top guy in all of your drafts. And people love to say when they watch this guy, oh, he's got shades of Patrick Mahomes. And then other people come in and they turn around and say, oh, Patrick Mahomes, you can't comp anybody with Patrick Mahomes. Everybody who's good, they say, is Patrick Mahomes. In this particular case, if you watch this player, he does have Patrick Mahomes esque ability in terms of two things, right? He can extend the play, he can find guys downfield, right? And then the number one comparison is he can effortlessly throw the ball on the move at a moment's notice, right? The flick of the wrist. You see it with Mahomes. You saw it, the greatest example, even more than Mahomes, was probably Michael Vick. Michael Vick with that left hand, he would just go and the ball would be gone, right? Like he would, hitting guys, Rob Finneran and Algie Crumpler down the field at a moment's notice. I love that, man. I love that out of Caleb Williams. And that's the difference between him and Justin Fields. Justin Fields was looking to run, he was looking to move. With Fields, he's just not a good passer in that sense. He's never had a good passing season. Caleb Williams doesn't run at that level, but he can extend plays. He can run when the space is there, just like Mahomes does. But his priority is looking to make the biggest and best play for the team. His default isn't to run, just like Mahomes would rather chuck it downfield, even if the run is wide open, than run it himself. And that's to me, the perfect model for the quarterback here. I see Dustin in the chat saying if Minnesota takes a QB in the top 5, I'll take him over Caleb. Better landing spot. I will absolutely 100% consider that in redraft leagues. In redraft, I definitely lean into landing spot for short-term production. At the quarterback position, more than any position, though, I'm looking for two things. I want guys that can first and foremost be NFL caliber players, right? We did so much debating in 2021, right? Everyone had Trevor Lawrence at 1 for the most part. I mean, some people did sneak Fields in there, but Trevor Lawrence was the best prospect. He was 1, right? After that, we did all this debating about upside, like mobile upside of Trey Lance or Justin Fields or whatever. And it turned out that at the end of the day, as always, the number one most important thing for your dynasty league, where we're thinking 5, 10 years, 15 years, is that they're NFL caliber quarterbacks. And with most of those guys, it doesn't matter if you win with Mac Jones or Trey Lance or Justin Fields or whatever, because they're not starting quarterbacks right now. Their value absolutely plummeted. So for me, Caleb Williams going 1, this could be a draft like that where there's one guy, Trevor Lawrence, that's a starter and nobody else. And I think if one of these guys is going to be that guy, it's Caleb Williams. If he goes 1 and confirms that, then he's 1 for me. That's the way I roll. But I do get it in redraft and draft, and best ball and all that. I will definitely take a look at landing spot and potentially move some guys around and make some stats in that case. But for me in Dynasty, I care most about who's going to be a guy. A guy. First, you got to be a guy before you can become the guy, right? So in the second tier, you have Drake May and Jaden Daniels. For me, I still have Drake May at 2, but it doesn't really matter because my take, of course, and this shouldn't be a controversial take, but it seems to be on Twitter, is that whoever goes QB2 in this draft will be my QB2. And historically speaking, studies done by Dave Kluge, studies done by me, studies done by people around the industry show without a doubt that draft capital has historically at the quarterback position been incredibly indicative of success. It goes for the QB1 and the QB2 drafted in NFL drafts. This is a study I did recently that I'm going to publish an article on. If you take all the quarterbacks drafted the last 25 years, right, and you take all the top 12 seasons by all the quarterbacks over that span, which is, of course, 300 seasons, right? Over 50% of them came from the quarterback drafted either 1 or 2 in the NFL draft. And that even includes Drew Brees, who went as the second quarterback off the board, just happened to be in the second round, right? The vast majority of the quarterbacks that produce top 12 seasons in fantasy are the first or second QB off the board. And when you get down to QB 5 and 6, especially 6, that falls off a cliff. The best QB6 in fantasy football is basically Russell Wilson, and the next best QB6 is Colin Kaepernick. And the third best one is Logan Thomas, who scored all his fantasy points converting to tight end. So when you look at some of these other guys that we'll talk about here, it gets pretty dangerous. But with Drake May, to me, he's the perfect combination of arm talent and mobility, right? He in the same vein as Caleb Williams. That's why these guys were the top 2 prospects pretty much the entire time up until recently. And his completion rate, his stats aren't eye popping, but neither were Josh Allen's. Josh Allen had an NFL caliber arm and incredible athleticism and mobility, and teams drafted those NFL caliber traits. They didn't care about the stats, and it worked out great for them. And I think Drake May falls in the same boat. If he goes 2, he's my QB2. Now, if Jaden Daniels goes QB2 to Washington, then he's my QB2. Like it's as simple as that for me. And if you want to plant your flags and do your own thing, then absolutely go right ahead. I just in my dynasty leagues where we have the benefit of having the draft, I am going to give myself the best odds of succeeding. That's it. That's my goal. Is I don't giving yourself preconceived notions and biases and all this stuff is the best way to make a mistake and give yourself worse odds. And sometimes it does pan out, right? Like sometimes you buy a $1 scratch ticket and it hits, and you buy a $20 scratch ticket and it doesn't hit, and you say to yourself, "Oh wow, the $1 scratch ticket had the better odds, or is the better play, or is a smarter move," but it never was, right? The better odds were always going to be not buying scratch tickets at all, but going to the casino and playing blackjack, or even just playing roulette with red or black, which is what drafting a quarterback in the high end of the first round is. We're talking 50% hit rates, even for the top dogs here. So you want to just give yourself the best odds. And Jaden Daniels, for me, I mean, he has the best mobility in this class. He has the best odds of becoming a pure rusher like a Jalen Hurts or a Justin Fields. But he's got some size issues, some durability issues, some questions about his ability as a pocket passer. And, that could see him fall to three or maybe not even be drafted in the top three, or maybe he goes to two. So for me, those two guys are there. And then JJ McCarthy now with all the smoke and the steam around him has to be in the discussion. And again, when it comes to a guy like this, I don't care about the stats and I don't care about, oh, he didn't do enough. What exactly did you want this guy to do? The team went undefeated and they won the national championship. Did you want him to try to attempt to go to Jim Harbaugh of all people and complain that maybe he's not padding his stats enough to be drafted in the NFL draft? Can you imagine saying something like that to Jim Harbaugh? He would tear your face off and wear it around the locker room, explaining to the rest of the team why someone else is going to start and be the game manager that wins the national championship. So there's no world where you can blame JJ McCarthy for winning every single game because the offense and the defense were too good. I mean, it's a ridiculous concept. And if NFL scouts who have access to this guy in the locker room and have access to the pro days and the interviews and all these things decide that he's the QB2 or QB3, then I'm willing to draft the guy because I think he'll have the best odds of being an NFL caliber quarterback. I'm not going to rush out to best case rushing upside and skip over guys like this because historically that's not been the move. And call me boring, call me old fashioned, but I win a lot of fantasy leagues, and this is part of that process. So there you go. So I even put him in that tier with those guys now, given the information we have. The next group here, I rank them in the order that I believe in them. But again, whoever goes five historically has a much, much better chance of being a guy than the guys that fall to six and QB 6 and 7 or whatever else, right? So if Michael Penix Jr., that's the guy that I like best. He's exciting. He had a great pro day. He chucks the ball downfield. He had good wide receivers, which helps. But if he goes as the QB5, then he'll end up being my QB5. If he goes ahead of JJ McCarthy, great. Rank him there. Do it that way. But this guy, to me, he's the funnest to watch. He's the most exciting. He does have accuracy issues. He does struggle when he gets outside of the pocket. There's questions about his age, questions about his injuries, right? That's for the scouts to sort out. I don't have access to his medicals. Neither do you, but all these teams do. The teams that are going to draft him, they took him out to dinner. They talked to him. If they like him, then we like him. Bo Nix, to me, he's a very polished veteran. And I think if your team, like if he slides and your team that like let's say, for instance, there's a few teams that lost their backups, right? That lost teams, that lost Tyler Huntley or Joe Flacco or whoever else. Like if you're just looking for the most polished veteran that could also be your backup right away and a guy that you trust to play this year if your starter gets hurt, Bo Nix falls right into that. And he also is a guy that if I'm a team like the Vikings or the Broncos or the Giants, then I'm grabbing this guy and I'll see if he can start right away because the Giants need somebody to start day one with Daniel with Daniel being hurt, right? So Daniel Jones. So there's a real chance that this is a guy that could start right away. I just think he's kind of boring as a prospect, but sometimes boring works in the NFL. Sometimes those guys are guys that develop into passers and turn into the next Kirk Cousins or Jared Goff, which, say what you will about being boring, but they throw for 260 yards a game. right? Spencer Rattler is the next guy name you got to know. Former top prospect, bouncing around a bit, right? But you know, he and again never really lived up to the hype. But again, this is the college football is a crazy game where these guys are just worried about, for the most part, they're worried about winning at their program, and then eventually you do have guys like Spencer Rattler that'll transfer and say, okay, this program's not working for me. I'm going to try it out over here. You know, again, if they do lean back on his prospect profile and the skills and the tools, then maybe he goes high. I just, you know, at this stage, I don't really see it. He didn't really shine the way that we thought he was going to. And the last name I want to mention is Joe Milton, just because this guy's fun. He has an absolute cannon monster arm. You don't know where it's going to go. You know, it's kind of all over the place, but it's just fun watching a guy that could throw the ball 75 yards downfield, right? Like all the things that people say, like, you know, he could throw a ball through a car wash without it getting wet. He could throw a strawberry through a battleship. That's Joe Milton. Like this guy is an absolute cannon. So, you know, if he goes early, then great. But if not, who knows? But that's it for me for like the top guys. And again, the best ever draft classes have at most 4 or 5 guys, and that's incredibly rare. So we talk about QB 6, 7, 8. Probably, you know, probably got to leave him out, you know. And Dustin mentions Jordan Travis in the chat. We're going to get to some deeper sleepers next time around next week. Here, we're just going to hit on about 15 minutes or so for each position and get that going. But I did want to bring back up what Dustin said about Minnesota takes a QB in the top 5. I'll take him over Caleb. Better landing spot. The best way to take advantage of that kind of thing, in my opinion, especially if you have a hunch now, is best ball draft. Go if you go to like myffpc.com, use promo code Coop, and they'll give you 25 bucks when you deposit 35 or more. You go over there and you take your stabs on these guys and say, you know what? I think that Minnesota drafts JJ McCarthy, and he immediately gets to throw the ball to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson and Aaron Jones. And I think he's going to have the best rookie year. That's when you take advantage of that. Redraft in best ball. And you can go get involved right now on the never too early FFPC one where you can win $25,000. So you get a discount on McCarthy. He goes behind, well behind Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. And if it hits the right spot, Minnesota or wherever else, it's a beautiful thing. Right. And same thing with like Jaden Daniels. If you love the rushing upside and you look at Josh Allen and Justin Fields, who couldn't throw their way out of a paper bag as rookies. You know, Josh Allen's completion percentage was 52%, but who cares? He was running all over the field and he put up a big season as a rusher. Then, yeah, go and grab him in best ball drafts. That's the best way to take advantage of that, those hunches and those short term things. And then in our dynasty drafts, we'll, wait for the draft and we'll measure that in. So go get set up over there, myffpc.com. Use promo code Coop when you set up with your first time deposit. Next group here, even more fun than quarterbacks, wide receivers, right? Tier 1, we don't have to get too deep into Marvin Harrison Jr. He's just what else is there to say besides this guy is the biggest, fastest, strongest, best prospect, well-rounded prospect that we've seen in a long time, right? Like he's a star. So you go out and grab him at wide receiver 1 if you're drafting right now. In my opinion, no question. Now, there's another guy in the tier, and that's Malik Neighbors. And the reason that Malik Neighbors is in the same tier, and some people even have him ahead, is because of, I mean, the film guys, especially the film guys have him ahead, is because of his escapability. And at the next level, there's something to be said about game-changing ability to maneuver with the ball in your hands. Certain guys have not just the speed that he has and the agility that he has, but the awareness that he has to create with the ball in your hands. And you see it, like I've seen comparisons for him and the way he moves and operates to guys like Antonio Brown, which Antonio Brown, when you watch him play, the most incredible thing about this guy, his route running was obviously great and his hands were great. But when he would get the ball, he would exercise every path to run around all over the field to get past the defenders, and they just couldn't get him. And oftentimes he would just end up going out of bounds. When if there was nothing there, they couldn't even tackle him. He would just go to the sideline, go out of bounds. I mean, besides that big Vontaze Burfict hit, he didn't really take a lot of hits. He was able to evade defenders at an incredible level. And Tyreek Hill, of course, does that with tremendous speed as well. And they say that Malik Neighbors has that ability, and that's very exciting especially, in the best balls and things like that, where those big plays come through in spades. So if Malik Neighbors, I mean, honestly, it's going to be tough here because I like Marvin Harrison Jr., but if Malik Neighbors, a team drafts him ahead and he goes to, say, the Cardinals at 4 to be the number one wide receiver for Kyler Murray, and then Marvin Harrison maybe doesn't go for a little bit or ends up on like the Giants or something, they're the people that are, purely sold and stuck on Marvin Harrison Jr. might have a decision to make. Now, the reality for me, the way I look at it is I look at it like 2011, where we had two incredible top tier prospects, some of the best all time. The best two, Calvin Johnson went, I think, 2009 or 2010, and he's like the number one all time. But very shortly after them in 2011, we had Julio Jones and AJ Green, and they both went in the first round. And AJ Green went before Julio Jones. And guess what? Debate all you want about whether to take Julio Jones or AJ Green in Dynasty. They were both awesome. I know injuries kind of derailed both of them towards the end, and AJ Green more so earlier than Julio Jones, but they were just both incredible. And I think that's what you have here. Is it's almost like a you can't miss situation with these two guys. So I have no problem taking either of them. Just as long as you get one of them, it's a good thing. At tier two, Roma Dunze could be in a tier of his own, and some people have him in the top three. Our own Dan Servadidio has him at 2, and that's honestly a fine take. He was incredible. The one, it's like statistically, he was awesome, especially in his senior year. The only knock I have on him is that these other guys all did it at a younger age and in their first few years. If Drake London went back to school for a fourth year, how many contested catches would he have had? A guy that led the NFL this year in contested catches. What if he went back to school? How incredible would that have been? Roma Dunze did that. He had the most contested catches he had in a season was 4. So he apparently worked out with the basketball team on like rebounding and positioning and body awareness and space. And he went back to school and he had 21 contested catches last year. That's a big reason that he took a step forward is he wanted to prove to everybody that a weak spot in his profile could become a strength. And he did that, which is why I have him at the top. But what would happen if Marvin Harrison Jr. went back to school? And now he was a year older than everybody and was just dunking on everybody. And then it's like, okay, now he puts together insane stats. He didn't need to do that because he was ready. And Roma Dunze kind of did, which to me, that's enough for me when we're splitting hairs at the top to have him just at the top of tier 2 instead of in tier 1. And I also personally put Brian Thomas Jr. in tier 2 with Roma Dunze just because he's a very well-rounded player. He didn't produce at a super high level, but he was teammates with Malik Neighbors. I mean, like, what are you going to do? Right? Justin Jefferson was teammates with Jamar Chase, and they kind of, Joe Burrow threw for a gazillion touchdowns, which is why they were able to do what they did. But Jaden Daniels was the Heisman winner because he had these guys. So Brian Thomas Jr. to me, especially at his size, 6'3", 210, running a 4.33, like he's a prototypical split end in the NFL, and I think he's pretty much locked into wide receiver 4 for me. So if he goes, if he's going to go in the first round, he's going to be a great pick. This is if for people drafting in the first round of anywhere, super flex especially, like there's it's a great year to be a guy that was competing or won a league because they're going to be great players to take in the back half or mid to back half of the first round too. So that's why I really don't try and tank very much because again, in Superflex, there's only so many quarterbacks, but there's plenty of good wide receivers here. Like I have no problem picking at 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever, right? So that's my first 2 tiers. In this next group, you've got kind of guys that are higher risk, higher reward. That first group, the first 2 groups, they are kind of locks. They got really good floors to me. Again, there's no locks because Corey Davis and N'Keal Harry, those guys busted when everyone said they were locks. Sammy Watkins was a lock. He didn't really pan out, but I look at these guys in this next tier, and there's a lot of risk, but a lot of reward. Number one, if we're talking risk reward, has to be Xavier Worthy in tier 3 here. And he's just got crazy speed, the fastest 40 time of any wide receiver. And he's not just speed, he has great route running. Now, the concern always with these guys is that they're just going to end up being a field stretcher, a one trick pony, a boom bust type player, which is why we take guys like this in best ball because even if he is a field stretcher, we don't mind that. We get the long touchdowns in the good games, and we don't worry about the bad ones. But I think he has the ability to be an every down type player and transcend that, which guys like Tyler Lockett and Brandon Cooks and Tyreek Hill did. They are field stretchers. They stretch the field with their speed, but they had a full complement of route running and a route tree that they're more than that, right? So I think that this guy could easily be the next Brandon Cooks or or Santana Moss or Deshaun Jackson that is consistent from week to week. So I do like Xavier Worthy. Adonai Mitchell is another guy, crazy athletic, but not much production. That's the thing is that he didn't he at Texas he sorry not at Texas but he didn't produce very much at all. So you go and look at it and the people that love models, right? Like and I love models too like JJ Zachariason and Dwayne McFarland, who we mentioned earlier, he's not going to do well with breakout age and with these models because he didn't really put up big production, right? But this is a player that if the right team takes him with his raw skill set and NFL caliber traits and they develop him, that he could be a star. So he has to go in this group along with these guys. Now, the next guy is a guy that models do love, right? And again, models, they look at predictive things like number one that's huge for Troy Franklin is breakout age, right? When you look at breakout age, which is how young a player is when they have a seasons that uh, that 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 transcend certain thresholds, right? There's actually a the breakout age is a huge factor when they do it at like freshman or sophomore year. With guys that do it later, there's oddly a negative correlation, which is the concern kind of we talked about for Roma Dunze, even though he had a younger breakout age because he had good seasons, but he had his best season in the last year. And it makes sense. Like if you have to stay in school and you're the older guy there playing against a bunch of younger guys and you have your only good season then, that's kind of a knock on you. And the correlation is not that good. And these guys still get drafted really high. And when they bust, that's why you see like a Bayless Jones or a D. Eskridge that were older players that had high breakout ages and then didn't translate because they're no longer going up, older guy going up against younger players. Troy Franklin doesn't have that problem. The models love him because he had an early breakout age. He's an early declare, right? And yeah, that's the other thing is that, all the good guys declare for the league and you're hanging around, you have less competition from your teammate wide receivers. I mean, it's kind of scary. So Troy Franklin, he hits all those. He's just barely 21 years old now when he's declaring. So it's a good setup for him. The thing is, Roma Dunze went back to school and got all those contested catches and boosted those numbers. Troy Franklin isn't doing that, and his contested catches aren't good so far. His size has been noted as an issue. A comp that's been given for him is Jamison Williams, which we don't know what he's going to be just yet, but he's having a hard time kind of carving out an every down role because he really just operates in space. He can get behind guys, he can do the end arounds, but he's not really creating separation. And he's not really making contested catches, which that could be a problem for Troy Franklin. So you have to keep that in mind. And again, because he's not going back to school, we don't get to see whether he's going to pull a Roma Dunze and dominate on everybody in an extra year. But I don't mind taking a stab on him. Again, any one of these guys could end up being the wide receiver five. They could move up to wide receiver 3 or 4 or 2 if they just get drafted high. So we'll have to keep an eye on what's going on that with the landing spot and everything else. There's a couple other guys I put in this tier. Xavier Legette is the opposite of Troy Franklin and the exact concern type guy we have for what I just talked about. So some of these late breakout guys do succeed in the NFL, but the odds are against them. And Xavier Legette is the exact kind of guy that did virtually nothing until his fifth year only breakout guy. He does have big size, so he can play split end at the next level, which is nice for him because there are a lot of teams that could use a guy like that. The Patriots, they just lost Devontae Parker with all the Kendrick Bournes and Demario Douglases. They need a big split end. The Lions, they have a field stretcher in JMO. They have Amon-Ra St. Brown in the slot. They have Sam Laporta at tight end. They could use a big split end opposite them, which a guy like Xavier Legette could be. But the bust potential for a guy like this is high because he did not do anything until his fifth year, which is scary for us. The models do not like it. Some people will take him straight up off their board because of those models. So we have to be very careful with a guy like this. Again, the draft will help us sort this out. And again, when I look at the reason I kind of group guys into different play styles and things like that is the draft will help with that narrative. One good example was the 2020 draft. I believe that whatever draft, I think it was 20, it might have been 19, the draft with T. Higgins and Michael Pittman, where there were actually a bunch of big split ends in that draft. bigger bodied outside guys that can beat press coverage. That draft had a bunch of them, right? And people loved different ones. They were all planting their flag. Oh, I like T. Higgins. Oh, I like Michael Pittman. I like Chase Claypool. Uh, I like Denzel Mims, right? And when you went through and saw the narrative of the draft in the second round, where the very first two picks in the second round were T. Higgins and Michael Pittman, two teams that needed split ends took two split ends, right? After that, there were split end needy teams that were passing. And then the Steelers took Claypool, and then the Jets actually traded back. They could have taken a wide, they could have taken a split end when they needed one. They traded back, and then they took Denzel Mims, right? So to me, I looked at that and I was like, yikes! Like how much they love this player when they need this player, and they're like, we don't have to take him here. We don't want to take him here. We'll take him later if he's there, I guess. And he ended up being there. But I couldn't possibly have ranked Denzel Mims ahead of T. Higgins and Michael Pittman after that happened. And that's why the draft, not just capital, not just landing spot, but the narrative of the draft is important. So to me, stories like that and watching things like that unfold helps us sort these guys out. And when you look at guys like Roma Dunze and Xavier Worthy and Troy Franklin and all these guys that could potentially be split ends, Brian Thomas Jr., the order that these guys are drafted, who's being traded up for, who's trading down, who's being passed over, that matters to me. So there you go. Nick Stan, see you in the chat, brother. What's happening, dude? Thanks for popping in. Thank you guys all for supporting the show, hanging out. We're going through some, for those just tuning in, we're going through some prospects, top prospects in each position. We did quarterbacks already. We've gone through the top three tiers essentially. I have one more guy in tier three, but we've gone through Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze, Brian Thomas. Those are tier one and two. Tier three, as kind of like the high risk, high reward guys, we have Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, Troy Franklin, Xavier Leggett. The last guy I'll throw in this tier is my guy, Lad McConkey. And he's more than just a slot wide receiver. You see a white wide receiver, people immediately want to say, oh, that's a slot guy, right? That's Wes Welker or whatever. And the funny thing is, people comp him to Edelman. And then people will say, oh, he's McConkey's not just a slot wide receiver like Edelman was. Edelman wasn't just a slot wide receiver. In most of those seasons, he played more flanker than he did slot. Same with Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp plays the slot for three wide receiver sets and then moves outside the flanker for two wide receiver sets. That's what Lad McConkey is capable of if things pan right for him because he's a great route runner both outside and inside. So he can do it, man. He can absolutely do it. And Nick Sand wants to know if there's a Puka Nacua in this draft. Entirely possible, but you're gonna have to stay tuned until next week's Friday show when we look at the deeper dogs here. We're looking at the top bosses right now, but yeah, I've got some deeper guys, deeper cut guys that you want to look at. And you asked about Nico Collins. I still like Nico Collins, man. And the reason that I like him is that this team, the Texans, use a fullback, right? Which hurts the wide receiver three. It's what happens with the 49ers and the Dolphins who run the same scheme. Somebody has to come out for those goal line and jumbo sets for the fullback and for the tight end. Stephon Diggs is not coming out. They traded for him. He's an elite player. He will stay on the field, especially in the goal line. Then you have to decide between the 6'3", 215-pound Nico Collins at split end, or are you going to take out the 5'10 at best, 165-pound Tank Dell, who last year in a goal line set broke his leg when he got tied up in the jumble in the mix. It's going to be Tank Dell coming out of the field, which Tank Dell, he's still an explosive player. He'd still be a great best ball pick, but I'm fading him a little bit because of that. So I still have Nico and Diggs as the top guys. I'm still fading them both a little bit too because it's really crowded now. So, but that's a quick thing on Nico Collins. Let's get back to what we're talking about. Lad McConkey, last guy from that tier. I think, especially if he goes to a team like the Chiefs or anybody that's going to use him as a full-time wide receiver right from the rip. And I know he wouldn't be full-time right away with the Chiefs. Not even Rashee Rice was, but I think he's a very exciting player. And goes to the Patriots, he can be a full-time player right away. Like if he goes to the Cardinals, you know what I mean? So we'll keep an eye on him. In tier 4, we're just looking at upside, like unbridled upside. And to me, I look at Keon Coleman, very divisive player. People that like him, people that hate him. But this guy was he was unsure on what he was going to do. He was playing basketball at Michigan State for Tom Izzo, right? Which is incredibly impressive for his athletic profile. Then he transferred to Florida State. Production wasn't ideal, but he flashed at times, making crazy plays, the hurdles, the touchdowns, everything. So if an NFL team is willing to take that risk, I am. If he falls to like day four, sorry, day three, like the fourth, fifth round, then it's a little bit scary. Then we look at it and say, man, the NFL teams don't think he's worth the risk, and he didn't have the production. Then we probably fade this guy out. Another guy that I'm willing to take the risk on personally is Roman Wilson, right? And I'm glad that you brought up Nico Collins, Nick Stan, because Roman Wilson went to Michigan, as did Nico Collins. And Jim Harbaugh was running the ground and pound, physical, grinding game management offense then as well. And Nico Collins didn't really put up incredible numbers in college, even though his profile was very similar to Kenny Galladay, who, of course, with Matt Stafford had a 1,000-yard and 10 touchdown season. They had very similar draft capital and profile to a guy like that. And now that we see it at the NFL, we realize this guy can play. It's just that that's not what they wanted to do at Michigan. Well, Roman Wilson went to Michigan, and that's just not what they wanted to do. They were beating teams with a defense. They were beating teams with a game management style, not turning the ball over. They didn't need this guy to go crazy, but I'm not going to hold that against him. So if a team looks at this guy and says that in a explosive offense with more volume, he'd be a good player, then I don't see why I would argue with that. So I like this player on paper besides his production, and we'll have to see where he goes. The last one I just want to mention, just to make it a nice round 12, I'll throw Ricky Pearsall out there. He is like when people talk about Lad McConkey, oh, he's a slot guy, this, that. That actually is what Ricky Pearsall is like the white prototypical slot guy. But if a team values that on day two, then we will as well. So, a team like the Bengals, who now need a slot guy, like he could play right away and be a starter right away. So that's kind of the top 12 or so guys. And again, we're splitting hairs. Throw some names in the chat, Dustin. If you're still hanging around, I know you got a bunch of them. There's plenty of guys you could throw in that tier. I'm just throwing around some names of guys that potentially either have upside or could just, if they go on day two, be NFL guys, right? Let's get to running back. Running back it's hard to say. For a long time, it was the currency of fantasy football. In Superflex, it's now quarterback. Like for the longest time especially in single QB leagues, it was like if you were winning now, playing to win, you trade for running backs. And if you were losing, then you got to trade your running backs away. And that's what drove the trade market for dynasty leagues. To a certain degree, I think that still is the case. Like at the end of the day, when Christian McCaffrey scores 375 PPR points, right? It's hard to beat that team, right? There are teams that through modern history, very recently, I know it seems like forever ago, but like if you just had Alvin Kamara when he scored 6 touchdowns in the championship, or if you had Todd Gurley, or if you had Jonathan Taylor, or if you had Christian McCaffrey, you just won. And that still happens to some degree. So you have to be cognizant of top RBs. Thing is, in this class, there's not really a top RB. It's pretty flat. Now, to me, I will paint a picture right now of how we would get a number one top RB, in my opinion, with a bullet, would be Jonathan Brooks, who was the best running back in college, in my opinion, and then he tore his ACL. And the guy that did the ACL surgery for Jonathan Brooks, his name is Dan Cooper, no relation to me, but he is the Dallas Cowboys team doctor. If the Dallas Cowboys, with only Rico Dowdle essentially on the roster, decide that based on what their doctor did with the surgery, the medicals that they have more advanced understanding of than any other team, if they decide to draft him in the second or third round and make him their starting running back and potentially the first running back off the board, then he will be the running back one for me. If they believe that, then I believe that. If they pass on him, then it could be a little dicey, man. I mean, they know things that we don't know, could be a little scary. But Jonathan Brooks, the narrative exists for him to be the top running back. Now, another guy that people like and that he goes first in best ball drafts because he doesn't have a knee injury is Trey Benson. And when I say he doesn't have the knee injury, I mean currently doesn't, because he had a very serious knee injury that he had to overcome. And he was able to overcome it. And he was able to produce. And he was able to look good at the combine. Now, we don't have the medicals. We weren't part of those examinations. My understanding is that it went well, but if he falls in the draft the way like Sean Tucker did, where he went undrafted because of medical issues, or if he falls like very deep in the draft, then we have to keep that in mind. If he goes, like Tajay Spears, who only has one ACL, if he gets drafted where Tajay Spears did, then we're in on Trey Benson. And that's just the things that we have to keep in mind. We have to be cognizant of what we don't know. The wisest people understand what they do not know, right? Like you and I couldn't possibly know everything in the world. We don't have teams of scouts with boots on the ground at these games, doing the interviews, doing the dinners, doing the 40 allowed visits, right? We don't have all that information. So we're trying to group these guys together into profiles that we like, and then see how it shapes out in the draft, and then make our best plays. Right. So those guys are kind of in the top tier for me, Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson. But it is pretty flat across the board. Like there's plenty of guys that if they go at the right spot could be the dudes. Like Blake Corum, for instance. His profile is kind of boring, but this Michigan team was the best team in the league, and he was the running back that was the driving force behind them essentially winning the championship. The defense and the running game is really what got them there. So if this guy gets good draft capital, and if he goes especially to play with Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman with the Chargers, then you can't ignore that, right? And we tried to ignore that with Kyron Williams, where the production was okay out of Notre Dame, and the combine was bad. Right? He was small. The speed wasn't there. He went in the fifth round or whatever. And it turns out that this guy can just flat out play ball, and he has a nose for what he's doing and a nose for the end zone. If Blake Corum, if teams look at him that way and draft him that way, we can try to ignore it all we want. But I mean, I'm just going to, again, give myself the best chance to succeed. Other guys in this group, Braylon Allen is a big bruising back out of Wisconsin. Shout out Pat Fitz, who came on the show. He's a big fan, and he would be a big fan even if it wasn't Wisconsin. But he talked about the upside of a guy like that. The Brandon Jacobs, Ron Dane type guy that can just run people over. But also the downside that he isn't really amazing in the pass game and might end up as a committee guy, right? Like if he lands with the Bills, where the quarterback just had 15 rushing touchdowns and they have James Cook as the pass down back, I'll be less excited. But if he lands somewhere where he can be the Derrick Henry type, where he's the starter and he only comes out of the game for like pure passing situations, which I mean, half the league is set up like that, then we'll be in on Braylon. So we'll just have to see what goes on with that. Another guy that another fantasy pros analyst came on our show, Derek Brown, and he really likes Marshawn Lloyd. And at 4.46 40 at 220, there's a lot to like, right? So the upside, of course, is that this guy he has vision, he looks good on tape, he's got the prerequisite size and speed. But then if you ask other analysts, like say a JJ Zachariason, that uses a model, right, instead of a lot of eye test, he's an older product, he's an older prospect, right? He didn't hit ideal production levels. He had to transfer. And guys of that profile, when you look at the models, don't have good hit rates. So that's why you've got the film on one side and the models on one side, and the draft at times is the great marrier of that. And if this guy falls and no one really likes him, then you look at the models and you say, you know what, not going to do it. And sometimes maybe even you do lean into the models, even if he does get drafted at a decent spot to a good team, and say, hey, you know what, I know teams probably got tricked by the eye test or by the size speed, and we're going to avoid it too. But again, Marshawn Lloyd is a guy that people that know ball watching this player seem to like him. So we got to talk about him here. Then there's a couple guys to me that are kind of average. Jalen Wright, average in many ways. Not a great breakout score, not great catching the ball. The metrics are meh, right? Will Shipley pretty much falls into the same boat, a do-it-all guy that doesn't do anything exceptionally. So we'll have to see where they go. And then one last guy that I have to mention, especially because Dustin has been hanging out with us today in the chat, is Dylan Lobb. Uh, Let me know if I'm pronouncing that correctly in the chat. But this guy went to a small school, UNH, right? And we in later rounds, we're looking for reasons that guys fall, and we're also looking for steam behind them. So guy goes to a small school like UNH, he might fall in the draft. But you look at you know the where we've seen breakouts before. Puka Nacua last year was a killer at the Senior Bowl, and so was this guy Dylan Lobb, crushed the Senior Bowl, right? And then you look at the combine. Not only did he perform well at the combine, but he had some of the best interviews. Go check out the interview that Dustin did with him over at Dynasty Pros. This guy is sharp. He knows his stuff. He sounds like he has a high football IQ. Those are the kind of stabs I like taking on guys. And again, we'll talk about him more on next Friday when we talk about later round guys, but just wanted to mention him here. So before we get into the very last one, my favorite position, the position I spend the most time on, I have an article coming out on it. That's tight end. I just want to mention at FFPC, we talked about best ball, but what this segment is all about and this time of year is all about is Dynasty, right? So what you can do, there's two ways to play at ffpc.com. First, there's only one way to get in. Go over there using this QR code or the link in the description. Use promo code Coop, and they'll give you 25 bucks when you deposit 35 or more. That's first. You got to get that done. That's the one way in. Once you're in, there's two paths you can go. As Led Zeppelin once said, there are two paths you can go by. You can do a startup draft, which is from scratch, and you draft the entire team, including current players and prospects, and that's your team moving forward. And that is the most in-depth way to play. The other one that is kind of more fun is you can buy an orphan team. So say there's like a league with a $250 buy-in. Some people will have teams in those leagues they don't want to play anymore, and they'll sell them for like $100, $50. I mean, I've seen teams go for $1 when they're really not that good. But you can go and pick up a team like that, look at the good players on the team, and take them and say, I'm going to keep these guys. Look at the bad players that other people still like and trade them all away, which is a lot of fun. And then you should have a bunch of rookie picks. Buy at this time of year, buy a team that has rookie picks still. Some teams trade them all away, but you can buy a bunch of rookie picks and then you get to do the rookie draft too right after this. That's such a great way to get in. It's a good way to get a discount. It's a good way to prove that you know what you're doing. That is the ultimate challenge: is to take over one of those orphan teams, fix it up, like a good fixer-upper house, and get a discount. Right? Like it's cool to go out and buy a Corvette. It's even cooler to buy a used Corvette and fix it all up. And now it looks like a brand new Corvette at a fraction of the price. That's what the orphan teams are over at myffpc.com. Again, use promo code Coop. They'll give you 25 bucks when you deposit $35 or more. Let's wrap this show up with the tight ends, my guys. Number one is Brock Bowers, and we don't have to really get into it. All you have to know is that if you go to a site like Pro Football Focus that has their own grades and they have all the metrics, this guy is the number one tight end over the last decade in everything, in grade, in receptions, in yards after the catch per reception, in yards per route run, in everything, in every major metric. He is the guy, right? He could immediately be a wide receiver that is a top two pass catcher on the team and an absolute star. Yeah, Jeremy's got it there. Go in and the orphan crushing machine. That's what you got to do in your FFPC. But this guy is he's a super mega star. If he goes at 5 overall to the Chargers, I will move him up to my tight end 1 in Dynasty, honestly. So it probably won't happen, but if it does, whew, oh boy, him playing with Greg Roman, who already had Mark Andrews have a top 5 tight end season all time with him. They lost Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, Gerald Everett. It would be a killer spot. Now, Brock Bowers, everyone knows he's great, so we're not going to go too deep into that. You can't mention Brock Bowers, in my opinion, without mentioning Jaheim Bell. And I have him in tier 2. I have 2 guys in tier 2, and the one knock on Jaheim Bell really is size. But Brock Bowers is 6'3". Jaheim Bell is 6'2". Brock Bowers weighs 243 pounds. Jaheim Bell weighs 241. Jaheim Bell has longer arms. He has bigger hands. He has a bigger wingspan. Are we really going to take 1 inch and 2 pounds and say Jaheim Bell sucks while Brock Bowers is the greatest thing that's ever been since sliced bread? You really can't do that, in my opinion. Now, Bowers does, he's got like a slightly higher vertical. He obviously has more production. He's the better prospect. But Jaheim Bell, if he goes early to the right spot where he can play slot, he could be a star right away. Now, he could also end up as, a slightly worse, like he's like Evan Engram Chicken size, but not nearly as fast as him, right? And that's kind of the problem there. So he could end up being the next Cameron Braid or Anthony Ferkser or whatever. There might just be one tight end from this class that's good and Brock Bowers and nobody else. But Jaheim Bell, if he goes early enough, I'm betting on him. The other one that if he goes early enough, I'm betting on. And again, full write-up on this over at fantasyalarm.com for free coming out today. So you can read up on all this and more. But I'm just giving you the quick overview, the 100-yard view from the top down. So Jatavian Sanders is next for me. This is a guy that when there's actually a clear group of comps that I have for this type player where his hands are incredible. He did not drop a single pass on 67 targets last year, making it very easy for his quarterback. His route running is good, his separation is good, but the one thing is he doesn't have breakaway speed, right? He doesn't have the breakaway speed that Kyle Pitts or Evan Ingram or George Kittle have. There's a reason that George Kittle has more 40 plus yard plays than any other tight end, and that's because he runs a 4.52 40. Jadavian Sanders ran a 4.69, right? That puts him in a group with guys like Zach Ertz and Hunter Henry. And to me, again, that would be the upside comps. But Zach Ertz, for as good as he's been, how many targets he's gotten, he only has one 1,000-yard season. And he needed 156 targets to get there. And that's because Zach Ertz isn't that fast, right? So those guys need to be peppered with targets to have upside in fantasy football. And that's Jatavian Sanders. I think he can create the separation. I think he can make the catch, but he's not going to break off a 70-yard touchdown the way that Kyle Pitts or George Kittle or Chigakonkwo even can. So that's going to be the thing, is that he needs the right landing spot. And you see a guy like Hunter Henry, who is very good in man-to-man, just like Jatavian Sanders. He's very good in contested catches. He's good in the red zone. He's got good hands. But if he doesn't get peppered with targets, he's not going to have that upside for fantasy. And Hunter Henry has yet to be peppered in targets. Maybe this year is a year. But that's the problem for Jatavian Sanders. Landing spot is going to be crucial for this player. After him, so I got those guys in a tier of their own as pure pass catchers. You got Brock Bowers one, Bell and Sanders next two. The next group is going to draft capital and the draft narrative. Everything is going to determine pretty much everything for these guys in terms of how we rank them. And again, I'm just going to lump them in a group. I will rank them in the article, for the purpose of saying tight end 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But the draft is going to jumble it all up 100%. So I'll go through them in no particular order. Ben Sinnott is a guy where he is, unlike the first three guys, he has more prototypical tight end size. He's not even, the ideal tight ends are like 6'6, 250, 260. 6'6, 260 is like the Gronk type guys, right? Which is like the prototypical tight end size. Ben Sinnott's more like 6'4, 250, but it's still bigger than Jaheim Bell and Jatavian Sanders and Brock Bowers, right? And he can do it all from that perspective, but he just doesn't have the real difference making traits, in my opinion. And people point at relative athletic score with a guy like Ben Sinnott and some of these other guys, which factors in size adjusted speed, but his 40 time of 4.68 isn't doing it for me. Like, you need basically, I rank it anything under 4.55 speed is difference making. Anything from 4.55 to 4.7 is acceptable, right? And then anything over 4.7, you really got to get peppered with targets. So Benson out is acceptable, but the RAS score to him have like a 9.73 RAS score. I think they got to really adjust the 40 time to be more meaningful regardless of size. But you know what? Maybe I'll take that up with Kent Lee Platt. But yeah, Benson out, if he goes to the right spot to be a two-way tight end like the Dolphins or the Saints or something like that are trying to run a similar offense to the 49ers, then great. But we have to see on landing spot. Another one of those guys, Eric All. Eric All from Iowa. He checks every box like metric wise. I go through and look at snaps at wide receiver, good. Pass blocking, 2.5%. Doesn't get asked to pass block. Yards per route run, he is actually number 2, only behind Brock Bowers in yards per route run. The knocks on him are that he had to transfer out of Michigan because he had competition, but he transferred to Iowa, which is like the best tight end school. So it's not like he downgraded. He actually might have upgraded in terms of program, right? And the biggest knock is health, right? In 2022, he was dealing with a back issue where was determined as like life altering spine surgery, right? So that is scary. He came back to play in 2023, unfortunately tore his ACL. So we didn't get to see much of him. And, he's a complete wild card. That's why the draft is huge for a guy like this. If his medicals check out and a team drafts him early, out of the tight end factory of Iowa, we got to be in. We got to be in because, everything we did see from him when he was healthy was good. He was very good in yards per route run and was even better in yards per route run against man-to-man, which is a huge indicator for the tight end position. Absolutely massive. So Eric All is absolutely within those top prospects. But if he goes late or doesn't get drafted, then he's dust. You got to talk about Theo Johnson in this group because he, again, with the RAS score, top 10 of the last 35 years, his relative athletic score, which, at 6'6", 260, when he runs like a 4.6, 4.57, of course it's going to look great in those metrics. But 4.57 isn't like incredible. And it's not like he can just outrun every single linebacker and defensive back and safety at that speed. That's the problem, is that this guy, sure, he has that on paper, but we didn't really see it on the field. Like he was getting chased down and tackled. He only broke 2 tackles. For a guy that runs, has this crazy athleticism that's like Vernon Davis, apparently, top 10. And when I say top 10, out of top 10 of thousands, top 10 out of 1,100 in the last 35 years, he's top 10. But his biggest play was 34 yards last year. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, that's why I think it needs to be adjusted to some degree for really high end speed versus just okay speed. And the last guy in this group that draft capital will matter is Cade Otton to me. And again, he's kind of, in my opinion, a little boring. He's kind of good at everything, not great at anything in particular. He was like top 5 among the guys I really looked at being drafted in yards per route run. 4.65 40 is good. Size is good. 80% catch rate is actually incredible. That is one thing he was good at, like just 80.4% catch rate compared to Brock Bowers. It was like 78%. So that's great for him. But I mean, it's just nothing that is transcendent and otherworldly, which is what we really want to look for. And the one last thing in his favor, of course, is that he went to Ohio State, where they have a ton of wide receivers. They asked him to block on 12.9% of pass plays, which is high, which you do that with a big guy and you have a bunch of wide receivers. So, they were stacked with pass catchers. So maybe that's in his favor. Again, the draft is going to help us sort that group out. And then after that, and again, we'll talk about more about this on Friday. Just want to throw out some names like Devin Culp. Devin Culp ran a 4.47 at 200 and damn near 240 pounds, right? Only 3 guys over 230 pounds have run better than a 4.49 in the last decade. And those are Evan Ingram, who led all tight ends in receptions last year by 19. Wasn't even close. Kyle Pitts, who had 1,000 yards as a rookie the last time he had a good quarterback, and Devin Culp. So if a team looks at Devin Culp and says, okay, he was splitting with Jack Westover because Jack Westover is a better blocker. They had 3 wide receivers that will be drafted, and he just didn't get the targets. And they like that he has an elite NFL trait in his size and speed, and they draft Devin Culp, and we'll draft Devin Culp. The other name I want to mention is Johnny Wilson, who is, people don't like it. Florida State fans, cover your eyes and plug your ears, because Johnny Wilson doesn't want to play wide receiver. Dustin was at the combine and he talked to him about that. He says he doesn't want to play tight end. He wants to play wide receiver. But if you go to an NFL team and they say, hey, Johnny, go today and practice with the tight ends and the tight end coach, what are you going to say? No, coach. No, I'd rather just get cut than try to make the team as a tight end. No, you go and work out with the tight ends. That's what Darren Waller did. That's what Juwan Johnson did. That's why they're in the league. So Johnny Wilson as a wide receiver, man, if as a tight end, I would love him. So there you go. That's a quick breakdown. Next week, on Friday, we'll look at deep sleepers. Maybe we'll even bring on a rare Friday guest. I know Friday is usually a little solo show, a little solo chatter where I get my thoughts out there. Maybe we'll bring a guest. So make sure you go to Fantasy Alarm, check out the write-ups by Dan Servadidio and I. Make sure if you want to get all the deep cut stuff, all my rankings, my best ball draft guide, which is coming out next week, get set up with the full thing, the all pro package, which is 40% off for the annual right now. You can do that here with that QR code. Really means a lot to support us. Also go to myffpc.com, use promo code Coop. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. You can take that $25, apply it to a best ball draft right now, or you can apply it to a dynasty draft and get yourself rocking and rolling and take advantage of all this information we're getting out there 2 weeks before the draft. So thank you guys for tuning in. Hope you guys enjoy your weekend. We'll catch you next week.